Welcome to a weekend in my micro bakery. So in this video, you'll kind of see the entire process of what I have to do to stock up my weekly farm stand. And for background, I have a farm stand every Sunday. I just started this, I'm only like a month deep in. Eventually I would like to go to farmers markets, but I figured I'd start small. So my batches are still relatively small. I'm only making around 8 to 10, maybe 12 loaves a week, maybe like 36 cookies, around 27 brownies, and it honestly depends on each week. But I'm starting off small to be successful at future farmers markets, and I am honestly learning something each week, and that's why I kind of want to document my journey and share any tips or things that I learn. So here is day one of my process. I am just starting the dough for my sourdough loaves, and you can see I'm using these kind of large containers. They are food grade. And side note, this was kind of early in the morning. I was tired, that's why I'm in my pajamas and drinking coffee. But as I was saying, these containers are food grade, and it makes it really easy to make like larger batches of sourdough, especially since they need to go through the stretch and fold process. These bins make it super easy to do so. So then I will pour in my sourdough starter, which actually this day I realized I didn't make enough sourdough starter, and so you can see the bin on my counter in the back. That one I didn't end up being able to use. I was planning on 12 loaves, only ended up being able to do 8 because I did not measure my sourdough starter right. But as I said, I'm learning something new each week, so next week I'll learn to measure twice and cut once. So once the sourdough starter is included in my dough, that is when bulk fermentation officially starts. And bulk fermentation can take up to like 8 hours. It depends. It can take longer than that too, actually. It depends on the temperature of the dough. So you'll see in a second, once I'm done mixing these, I take the temp of the dough, and that will tell me how long and how high my dough needs to rise. So mixing the dough itself is quite a hassle when you don't have like an industrial mixer that you might see in other micro bakeries. So this is sped up and also shortened, but this itself took me like 10 minutes, like each bin, because the dough is so heavy and you want to make sure there's no pockets of flour being left and, stuff like that. So I'm definitely saving up for an industrial mixer. I think that would change the game in my micro bakery, but as I said, I'm just starting out and learning, so I don't want to do that just yet. And as I just mentioned, this is when I temp my dough, and I provided a chart for you guys from the sourdough journey. This is what I use for my bulk fermentation. It's super helpful. I temp my dough, I believe that this was 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and then that's when I know how much it needs to rise, because you don't want it to rise like more than it needs to. You don't want it to overproof at all. And it also gives you the typical time window it takes for that rise to finish. But usually, people say don't pay attention to the time, pay attention to your dough, because that's really what it ultimately comes down to. So you can see in this clip, I am just kind of marking where 75% of a risen dough should be. I didn't have a ruler here, so I was just using like a Post-it note, I don't even know what that was, to determine where 75% would be on my dough. And I marked it with a little expo marker. I like doing this because you can easily erase it after. And then that also allows me to easily see once it's reached 75%. Now we are on to our first stretch and fold round. In this video I'll end up doing 3 total. You'll see I'm kind of pulling the dough and folding it over. This just helps build up the gluten strength and give the dough a little more structure. Now I'm just adding in my inclusions, which were dehydrated rosemary and minced garlic for the week. Now my state is really strict with the inclusions that you can add, so I can't add like anything that is not fully dehydrated or cheeses or fruits, anything like that. Now I'm on to my second stretch and fold round. After this one, I will do one final round, and then this dough will sit on the counter until it is fully risen to that 75% that I talked about earlier. Now we are on to pre-shaping the first batch of dough. This is just the plain sourdough. I believe it makes 4 loaves in this batch. And so pre-shaping just kind of allows the gluten to give some time to rest before you do the final shaping. So I'm going to just kind of throw these into a ball a bit, and I'll leave them on the counter for 30 minutes. Now it's time to do the final shape on those plain sourdough loaves. So I have my bannetons here on the left. That's what they will end up doing their overnight cold proof in. I'm just doing a really basic, quick and easy shape method. So I'm just folding over each side and then kind of scrunching the top like a purse. I did this twice for this one, I'm not sure why, but you'll see I end up just grabbing it by the top and dumping it into the banneton. And I forgot to mention that at this time, it was probably like 5, 6, 7 hours since the last, actually, maybe it was around like 4 hours since the last stretch and fold. So this isn't all at the same time. It does need time to do that bulk fermentation like I talked about before. Now I'm just covering each banneton with a plastic shower cap. This is so it doesn't like fully dry out in the refrigerator when it goes in for the overnight cold proof. And I'm doing the same exact process with my other batch of dough, which was the rosemary garlic. And in between that, once I'm finally done with the shaping, I'm just cleaning up the table, trying to clean as I go. One thing you'll know about sourdough, if you do bake it often, it is extremely sticky and hard to get off like surfaces. So I have to use like an actual scrub before actually wiping it down, otherwise pieces will get stuck. Another thing to know about sourdough is you should never drain it down your sink, because it can actually ruin your pipes because of that reason. We have moved on to our cookie dough batter. I end up making 2 different flavored cookies, which you'll see at the end, but I usually start my cookie dough batter on Friday as well, because it actually tastes way better if it rests in the fridge for like 12 hours overnight instead of just baking it right away. So I usually make it the day before I bake, that way it gives it that rest period. And we have finally made it to bake day. I bake the day before my farm stand because it is still considered fresh. Sourdough is still considered fresh the day after, because sourdough actually needs 24 hours to sit and cure with the crumb and everything. So that's the reason I bake the day before. Also, because if I bake the day of, I would have to be up at like 2 a.m. Actually, I would have to just pull a full all-nighter to get everything going, because you also need to make sure it fully cools off before packaging it. Otherwise, the packaging will get like all the condensation and stuff. Now I am just scoring my loaves. I do one big large score for the bread to kind of rise and pop through, and then I just do some decorative scoring. And this is pretty typical on all sourdough loaves. And actually something I learned on this day, which I wasn't so happy about, but like I said before, I'm starting off learning every day and trying to share it with you all to help out. So something I learned with these scores that I did on the right, the large score, is I did it too close to the side. I should have done it more in the middle, because I end up using loaf pans, which you can kind of see in this clip. I'm using the double pan method, and the score actually was too close to the side, and it was almost covered by the pan, if that makes sense. So it didn't rise as much as I wanted it to. But yeah, like I said, I'm learning each time. After taking the dough out of the oven, I always temp it. It should be around 200 to 210 degrees Fahrenheit. I always look for 210 degrees Fahrenheit because I'm deathly afraid of making sourdough that is not fully cooked. So I always like to make sure it's at 210. It is time to bake the cookies. One of the flavors that I'm trying out this week, and it actually turned out so good, is s'mores flavor. So you can see I'm adding some graham crackers on the bottom, along with some Hershey's chocolate and a marshmallow. And then in a later clip, you'll see that I fold over my usual sourdough discard cookie, chocolate chip cookie dough, over the graham cracker and marshmallow and everything to kind of create a dome. That way when you bite into the cookie, like the marshmallow is in the middle and is like nice and gooey. So yeah, I really liked the way these came out. Something I did learn is that on the left pan I placed way too many cookies, so they kind of just attached themselves to each other and I had to break them apart. So yeah. And this is how the s'mores cookies turned out. They looked so perfect. Now I'm on to the final step in this process, which is packaging. I usually put my label, like my logo on the front, and then a list of ingredients, the weight, and any allergens that might be in the product. This is a typical standard law under cottage food operations in I think all states. Maybe like the strictness is different in other states. I'm not sure. But in my state, obviously they're very strict, and so I make sure to put that on every single product. And then here is what it looks like with the loaves inside. Here is how I package my cookies. I actually really love this packaging. It looks really official. And these, I usually do like 5 or 6 per pack, and then those s'mores cookies that I made were huge. So I ended up just packaging them either individually or double in these plastic like packaging. I didn't really like this plastic packaging, but it was all that I had because our regular cookie packaging was too small for it. And lastly, I forgot to record this, but I also make sourdough brownies, usually every week. But this week I did something different and made them in a muffin pan container. That way they can all come out like the same and consistent. Because I was having a problem before where they would be like slightly different sizes, or some would bake differently because I was using the regular like 9x9 pan. So I really liked how these came out, and I'm just packaging it in a little box. I believe I was able to fit 4 in. And here is the final products all on my shelf ready for the farm stand tomorrow. I really love how these came out. I'm happy with all the packaging. And yeah, it was a lot of hard work, and if you stayed along to see this entire process, thank you. If you have any questions or tips or any advice from me, I would love to hear it. Like I said, this is just my beginning and I'm still learning. So thank you.